Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Bartlett Sher is with us. He is the Tony Award-winning theatrical director who has won plaudits everywhere for his versatile and innovative staging of dramas, musicals, and operas, and even a feature-length HBO streaming movie. Today, the master director has a smash hit on his hands, the revival of Lerner and Loewe's Camelot at Lincoln Center Theater, up for a Tony Award for Best Musical Revival. The musical is a sea change from the original 1960 production with Richard Burton as King Arthur and Robert Goulet as Lancelot, and features a book completely redone by the iconic Aaron Sorkin, who of course wrote The West Wing. We're pleased to welcome Bartlett Sher back to the program.
Great to be here.
Now, Bart, congratulations. I mean, this is now a second coronation. You have play Letters from Home on Broadway. You have one in the oven, which is La La Land, the musical.
That's correct.
Going to Broadway. And you, of course, have Camelot, which smash hit success. So tell us, why did you decide to do Camelot? It's been revived 4 times.
We had this amazing event at Lincoln Center Theater, where we're doing it now, where we did a gala version of it, where we just pulled together a cast and did it for, to raise money for the theater. And in that cast, we had Lin-Manuel Miranda playing Arthur. And we just heard the score and got to look at the original script. And it was just a delight and really a great and joyful experience, and Lynn loved the musical. So from that experience, we kind of decided it might be really fun to look at it seriously, to bring it back. The one questionable thing was to look at the book again, to kind of see how to place it. It's very much of its time in 1960, and it was very much kind of felt like something that came out of the Kennedy era. So the challenge was to see if we could look at the book now for our own time and see if we can make a Camelot for today.
Well, the original in 1960, which had a long run, didn't get such good reviews, I think.
No, it didn't. No, it actually didn't do so well when it first opened, and then they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And as soon as they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, it turned around the fortunes of the musical, and they started doing very well.
And that was because of Robert Goulet singing his signature song, If Ever I Would Leave You.
It could have had a little bit to do with Richard Burton and Julie Andrews. I don't know. But they were all on it, and it was very popular, and it really struck a chord at that point. And the album had come out by then, and the album became one of the most iconic cast recordings of all time. Almost everybody had a copy of it. So many people who come to see the show now are really responding to the fact that their parents had the cast album, they heard it when they were young, and it's a big part of people's sort of consciousness.
Is it tough to direct a show when you know in advance that most of the audience has heard the music before and knows what the plot is?
Oh, I think, having done My Fair Lady or South Pacific or things like that, I think one of the interesting parts is that you enter into a kind of conversation with time, with history, with people's memories. And so you always have to ask the same question: what's the immediate significance of doing this play at this moment right now? And then you're also having audiences come in who are bringing their own experience of it. For example, when we did the film of Oslo and went down to DC to promote it and do some work on it, met with people at the White House and the White House Historical Association. And as important as Oslo was, all they wanted to do was talk about Camelot, because they were very interested and obsessed by the whole thing, and it had become so connected to John F. Kennedy and his administration. And that was interesting to me, because it felt to me like then you could take that story and ask, what do we think Camelot means to us now, after all we've been through, especially in the last 10 years of our history as a country, and how could we look at it again?
Well, you always like a contemporary political dimension to revivals of musicals. I guess you could say South Pacific was about racism, and King and I was about class, and
but I think those things are always been in them.
My Fair Lady about autonomy and
yeah. But I think all the politics are already in the piece. What happens is when you go back to it and we look at it through the lens of who we are now, we see things that they were exploring at the time. Because the issue of race in South Pacific was hugely important to Hammerstein following World War II, and it had been the first platform on race in the Democratic Convention in '49, and they were all responding to this question. Then we get to it in 2008. We have a new president running in Obama, and you find the questions come up again. So I just think the shows kind of come around when you need them.
Now, when you did the showcase at Lincoln Center with Lin-Manuel Miranda, did you then reach out to Aaron Sorkin to do the book?
Well, actually, I sat with Lin and said, well, who do you think is the best person to do the book?
He said Aaron Sorkin.
And he did. He actually said, you just worked with Aaron on Mockingbird. I think he would be great. Lin is, obviously a person who loves history and loves ideas and has got a deeply political strain to his writing. And he said he thought Aaron would be the best person.
Now, going back to the 1960 production, did you see it or are you too young?
No, I did not see it. No, I'm way too young. No,
You didn't?
I did not see it. And it's funny. I know I've seen many pictures. I've seen whatever video there is of it. There was a film that was made later. The film is quite different from the musical in a lot of small ways. So I was familiar with the kind of production history, largely.
Well, you had a series of almost iconic directors. You start with Moss Hart, of course, had a heart attack during the production.
Yeah.
You go on to the movie is Josh Logan.
Yeah.
I mean, and now we have Bart Sher, so you have a distinguished provenance.
Well, I appreciate that. I do think that there's a lot of kind of lore that goes with the original production. I mean, when it opened out of town in Toronto or something, the first preview was 4.5 hours long. It was exhausting the creators. They were like giving it all they had, and they were swirling around trying to find the sort of the vocabulary for the piece. It's tricky because it's based on this very important but very large book in T.H. White's Once and Future King. And that book's ungainly. It's a lot of material. And I think as they were trying to find their way into a plot for a musical from this very popular book, they were sort of trying to feather their way through to making a story. And there was a lot of work went into the original production.
Now, of course, the book deals with the King Arthur legend or King Arthur's story. Was there an historic King Arthur? Did he ever live?
There is believed to have been a historic King Arthur somewhere
Did he have
around
a round table and was
around
married
the
to Guinevere?
Around the 6th century, there is a lot of information about the original King Arthur, mostly in more northern England than, say, down in London as we experience it. He was one of the kings known for pulling together a lot of intensely warring tribal politics, between different groups all over England. And that's where the myth of the Round Table comes in.
Was he known for pulling a sword called Excalibur from a stone?
That's part of the myth that grew up from the legend of Arthur. And that's part of the thing that's central to the T.H. White book. Yeah.
Now, he pulled together a lot of warring knights, I guess.
Yes, and nobles.
They had allegiance to him. But in the Sorkin book, you really do more with the Round Table than it's just being a bunch of knights who are willing to hold together.
No, I mean, I think Aaron's thing is quite close to the original political framework of it, in the sense that there was a struggle between Arthur at the center and these warring nobles around him, and how to hold them together and introduce ideas like the rule of law, justice, equality, etc., and to bring those together. And that's something that Aaron sort of pulls together more carefully than perhaps the original book. And I think it's balanced against this love triangle with Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot, and the kind of relationship between the two. And that's the kind of spine of the plot between those two journeys in the piece. And what Aaron was able to do, and often, especially in the second act, was pull both threads together and make sense of them in the second act, where you have all these plots kind of unfolding all at once. And that's where I feel like we've done our most successful work with it.
Because way back when, it was the second act that was criticized
Yes.
so heavily, dragged on. And
Yes, the second act was the long act that no one could quite figure out. The first act sets up a lot of stuff. It's very unusual as a musical. It doesn't have a lot of big group numbers. It doesn't have a big dance component to it. It's a very plot-driven, character-driven musical.
But you gave it dancing, you gave it sword play, you gave it something really dynamic.
Yes, well, there's one sequence where there's a large joust in the original, which we changed into a sword fight. B.H. Barry is one of the great, I've worked with him many times, and he is one of the great fight choreographers you can ever work with. So Aaron really wanted to make that into something that was more dynamic for an audience to watch, and it's fun. It's really fun.
Okay, tell us a little bit the cast, because you had a terrific cast, and you have the three principals are, of course, Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. So talk
Well,
about those actors.
I think the biggest change in ours is to look at Arthur as a character, which if you're close to the T.H. White book, Arthur is meant to be a young king, a king who is sort of like everybody, and who who is not meant to, he pulls the sword out of the stone and becomes king, but he's not royal in blood necessarily. So he's kind of an everyman, and he's much younger. So with Andrew Burnap, he does an incredibly nuanced, extraordinary job of playing the youthfulness in the king and the everyman quality of him alongside of his more noble, powerful, deeply intelligent work. And then you match that against Philippa Sue, who is well known from Hamilton, and you get a marriage which Aaron makes a more political marriage. So she's forced by her father to make peace with France and to be put into marriage with the king, sort of on purpose. We've seen that happen in royal situations. Happens a lot.
Well, we're thinking perhaps of Charles and Diana. I mean, he says it is a business relationship.
Yes, correct. I wasn't thinking of it I don't think he was thinking of it in terms of Charles and Diana, just more in terms of how often across the history of royalty in Europe, you would do arranged marriages, often as treaties, alliances, to create connections between countries. So she's a kind of a barter with her father, the King of France, to the King of England. And that political arrangement had some impact on how romantic it was or wasn't. And that's very new. That's accentuated in the story that we have. And then Lancelot, a fellow countryman, comes to pledge his allegiance to Arthur, and they fall in love in their own way, or they have a romantic relationship, and it creates a lot of tension within the center of the story.
Well, of course, she feels trapped in the marriage because she realizes he loves another, and that's a parallel with Charles and Diana.
Yes.
And,
I don't know, trapped in the sense that he doesn't feel like, I think he cares deeply for her, and we learn later that how much he does, but he doesn't feel, he feels kind of responsible for having trapped her in the marriage by having used her as a part of a treaty. So I don't think he feels as comfortable. His previous relationship with Morgan Le Fay was when he was much younger, and has an impact on the story that we're telling. Yeah.
And then you have this fascinating character, Sir Lancelot.
Yes. He's described as a zealot. He's very, very devoted to the Round Table. He's an extremely powerful swordsman, and he's devoted in his ideas to the spirituality and the ideas of change and everything that the Round Table represents, and devotes himself to Arthur completely. At the same time, he and Guinevere, as fellow countrymen, have their own relationship. And then it gets complicated.
Sure does. Now, Lancelot is played by whom?
That's Jordan Donica.
Jordan Donica, and he was nominated for Tony
He
as
was.
well.
He's got some of the most iconic, extraordinary songs. There's a song, C'est Moi, If Ever I Would Leave You. They're incredible, and he's an incredible talent. He also was in My Fair Lady when I did it. He played Freddie Eynsford Hill. He's just a very special talent.
It's very special talent. Well, that's always important in any musical.
Well, all three of them together, when you really take all three of them together, I don't think I've ever worked with three people who brought so much into the work. And especially in a piece like this, where it's really built on their performances and on their relationships, is right at the center of it. It's not built on, obviously they have to be good singers and good performers, but it's an extraordinary story. They have to represent kings and queens and the highest level of who we are, and they're just remarkable artists.
There's a little bit of bringing royalty down to earth which we saw some of in the coronation, because you kind of, maybe Sorkin debunks the idea that he could pull a sword out of a stone that no one else could pull out of the stone, but he says, well, lots of other people tried and they loosened it.
Yes. I think that's a political point of Aaron's, that we all have responsibility, and I think we approach it as political in the sense that we all have a responsibility for the leadership in our own country. We're all a part of the same largely democracy, and we all have to participate as citizens. So when he says 10,000 people loosened it for you, it's a larger point. There's been a lot of criticism of the piece. We took the magic out. But from our point, first of all, there wasn't very much magic in the original. But I think the larger point is that magic is a deception. It's a way of getting people off track. The real thing is all of our belief and commitment in the ideas, our responsibility as citizens, our connection to what a democracy or justice or equality means. And I think that's Aaron's larger point, and I think that's T.H. White's larger point, that we all share a responsibility for making a better kingdom, a better country. And especially that was the idea, I think if you look at Aaron's work, there's a romance throughout his work with democracy, with the ideas of leadership. And that is explored further into Camelot. And that's the center of who he is as a writer, and why I thought he would be and is good for Camelot now, is like, what are the questions we're asking ourselves about leadership, about how our kings and queens work, about what our responsibilities are, how we work with others, how we disagree with others, and how we find some way to share the responsibilities of leadership, all of us.
But then he has the crushing line, some people will follow anyone.
That's a line which is said to him by Morgan Le Fay, and it's a very apt one, because we do have to be careful of that. People will follow, there's another line that's one of my favorites where he talks about, people think I slayed a dragon, they will believe anything. I always think of like QAnon. People will, if led in the wrong direction, will believe things that just aren't true or possible, and that's dangerous in its own way.
What is Camelot?
Well, what is Camelot?
Is it a place? Is it an ideal?
I think it's an idea. I think Camelot is an idea, and when it's introduced in the song, it's used in the spirit of poetry, in the spirit of metaphor. It's a place, but it's like the highest ideals of what we hope for. So when Jackie Kennedy picked up the idea of Camelot following her husband's death, it became really important to think of the kind of, to elevate to myth or to spirit the aspirations of what we wanted the best for our country, that he represented at the time. And now when we go to it, I think what is Camelot is the question we all have to ask ourselves. How do we make it better? How do we see through poetry, through art, through musicals, how something can be at its best?
But she did say there'll be other great presidents, but there'll never be another Camelot. So
that was her interpretation of the myth, which was very moving at the time, and he loved the musical and had the album.
She said there's no historical proof that he really loved the musical more than other musicals, is there?
Well, I wouldn't have been surprised, though, given how popular the Cast album was, that he would have been listening to it, and that it would have been something that was important in the house. Of all the musicals he could have been listening to in 1960 or 61. So, I mean, I believe that's one I totally am on board with.
You're on board with that?
Yeah.
Okay, but she saw Camelot as aspirational, that it would never happen again, but you
I think it's really a question.
Different.
I think the way you pose it is right. It's a question about what do we think our Camelot would be? Where should our country be at its best? How can we aspire for it to be greater, to be more connected, for the machinery of democracy, the machinery of justice? And I think following what we went through through the pandemic, especially in the theater, we asked a lot of really good questions about how we work, about who does the work, about who participates in the work, who writes the work. Those questions were important for us to be a better theater community at the end of the pandemic than we were at the beginning. And I think everyone has worked hard for that to happen in our version of Camelot. But I think that's something that's a challenge for all of us.
So in your version, you see barriers between people that at times dissolve, at times are restored?
I mean, I think it's a verb. I don't think it's a thing. I think it's an activity. I think it's something you work at to look at how to perfect, to improve the way you work with others, the way you build a caste or community, the way you build a city, the way you build a country. That we all work together to try to improve it with the idea, aspirationally, that it can be a better place.
At least for one bright, shining moment.
As for the bright, shining moment, hopefully. And I think that's the spirit of Arthur. Arthur's struggling so hard, like all of us, as an everyday person, to make possible, to take on the responsibility to make his country better.
Well, that's the idealistic view
Yes.
of Arthur. But then Arthur is kind of a rogue. I mean, he has this old love in his back pocket. He has an illegitimate, I hate the word illegitimate, but he has a child out of wedlock.
Yes.
Who comes back to haunt him and complicate his life. Has some baggage.
Yes, but we want to have a good piece of drama, and all of us are not perfect. That's the whole struggle in making good theater. Good theater is not between a right and a wrong. It's between two rights. It's that people are flawed and they do struggle to be better. It's that they in the same way that Guinevere, has an affair with Lancelot and sees that it's wrong and there's implications from it that affect the kingdom. And that makes for good theater, it makes for good musical theater, and also it tests the values that are being proposed in the piece, and that makes for us. And the nice part about being in the theater is we don't have to solve the problem, we just have to pose it.
Just ask the question.
Yes.
So, all right, so the question might be, why does someone so highly motivated, so idealistic, so loyal as Lancelot, how does he get to the point where he will betray his king?
It's a very good question.
And
That's
his friend. And what about Guinevere?
It's an excellent question, and they find, and there's all kinds of impinging things affecting them. He's very, very drawn to her and attracted to her, and he feels he wants to be devoted to the king, and he struggles deeply inside as a human being with that, and that is what makes Jordan's performance so powerful. Is to watch him to undergo that, and for audiences to see that we all struggle with that kind of thing, between the higher parts of who we are and the less high parts. And you see that enacted in the drama, and that's what makes it a kind of fun thing. It gives you reasons to sing.
You're not arguing that the French are more morally compromised than the English?
I am not. No, I would not argue that.
You would not argue that.
I would argue that human beings all encounter very complex emotional, personal, moral problems, and that's good for theater.
So I have a question for you, Bart Sher, because it's been just marvelous and we have to wrap up. So
Yeah.
my question is, it's a Passover question. Why is your Camelot different from all the other Camelots?
Oh, I don't know. I think Aaron's book is very special and really pulls together the story in a very powerful way. I think anyone who gets to come to the Vivian Beaumont Theater gets to experience in that space a musical with 30-piece orchestra, with the extraordinary thrust stage at the Beaumont, their relationship to a musical in the most powerful possible way. And so the experience of our history in something like Camelot and Lerner and Loewe, and the kind of magic of, if there's magic, the magic of the Vivian Beaumont Theater, plus 30-piece orchestra, plus a cast that we're so lucky to have this cast, makes for an evening for people to come see it, which is extremely special. One of the most beautiful things I've ever been able to work on, and I think it's an extraordinary question to ask when you come and see it. What is Camelot now? And to look at how artists in the past have asked this question before, and to share it for 2023.
I think one of the most dramatic moments in the show is the entrance of Lancelot from the back of the thrust stage, and as he pronounces Camelot a number of times with that deep baritone voice of his.
Yeah.
But anyway, wonderful answer to the root question. Bart Sher, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for coming by.
It's a great pleasure always to be.
Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. Meanwhile, take care, be well, and all the best. I'm Jim Zirin.
July and August cannot be too hot. And there's a legal limit to the snow here in Camelot.
Try to make each precious day one you'll always rue. It's May.